You're listening to the Power Project podcast, and I'm your host, Brandy Voth. It is my goal each week to inspire and empower you with stories of women that are living their most purpose-filled lives while embracing the power that God has instilled within them. I know today that you are going to find inspiration, empowerment, and encouragement from my guest. As some of you may know, I am an advocate with A21, which is a human trafficking organization. It's an international organization founded by Christine Caine, and they are doing huge things in the world and making waves in the fight against trafficking. And I've had the sheer joy of meeting some incredible human beings along that journey, and my guest today will definitely not let you down. Now, if you have had any past experience with sexual exploitation or trafficking, there may be triggers in today's episode, and it is a PG-13 episode. However, I do know that you are going to see the joy that is in her heart and that you will carry this throughout your day with a little fire in your step. So have a listen, will you? Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Power Project. I'm your host, Brandy Voth, and I'm on with my good friend today that I'm very excited to share with you all. One of the joys of what I get to do in this platform that I have is the fact that I have friends all over the world in varying countries. And they're not just friends of mine, but they are literal mountain movers that are doing the big things on a big platform. And you're going to get to hear from one of those today. I know that I've been talking quite a bit lately about A21 and the Walk for Freedom that we are hosting this weekend. That's going to be taking place all over the world in like 400 different cities and 51 different countries. And so that organization, A21, is what Malina is a part of. She's actually the Thai country director for A21, and I'm excited to have her on today. So say hi to my friend Malina. Hey there.
Hi, how are you guys? So happy. What a privilege and an honor it is to be here with you, Brandy, today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me. And you're my very first international remote podcast interview. So I'm excited to have the technology and the tools to be able to talk to you, continents away and countries away, and just sit around and chit chat like we would in the living room.
Yeah.
So if you could tell people a little bit about what it is that you do with A21 in Thailand, on the ground.
So I oversee A21, A21's offices in Thailand. So we have 2 offices in Thailand and 1 office just starting. We're developing an office in Cambodia. So my job is to make sure that everything is going well and we can develop and help as many people as we can. So currently we have 1 office in Bangkok and 1 office in Pattaya, Thailand. And the office in Pattaya is actually a child advocacy center. So if you guys are familiar with the concept, it's usually a place where children can get forensic interviewing done, and it increases prosecution of offenders, but it also protects children and provides them with everything they need for medical care, legal presence, to long-term assistance like schooling, education, vocational training, and everything that they have lost. Whether it's children or adults, we try to give them back their life back, basically, after trafficking. And our newest office is in Phuket, Cambodia, so we are right at the border, and we are basically planning to start another child advocacy center there, and hopefully, just like in Pattaya, we can share an office with the anti-trafficking police. So in Pattaya, we share an office with the Thailand Internet Crimes Against Children, so we work on online exploitation, child pornography, and child trafficking, as well as we help adults who have been trafficked as well, both men and women.
That's incredible. And I think that there's so many moving pieces to it that you're working with the law enforcement, you're working with the government, you have the child advocacy center there that is, you're utilizing an American model that you're putting to work there. And how long has the CAC been open in Pattaya?
So we've been open for almost 2 years, and I love that you said that it is an American model. And actually, most of our assistance on the ground in Thailand comes from the American embassy. So Homeland Security and FBI have heavily partnered with us to make this Child Advocacy Center a reality, because this is the best practice. This is what has been tested and trialed, and actually, we're trying to replicate the model on the ground in Asia, and it's something that really works. But it's also something that provides kind of holistic, full care for children and adults. And I think that being from the ground and working with the government and the police, everyone can see the value of the model. But you mentioned, yes, we work with the government quite a lot, and especially on child trafficking cases. And it's been such an honor to work with the Thai government. It's not always easy, but nothing that is worth having is easy. And I think that's part of what we want to do. We want to support the government. We want to support the American embassy and the other foreign law enforcement, because part of what the CAC does is actually provides assistance for foreign law enforcement agencies. So whether it's an NCA from the UK or AFP from the federal police in Australia, that's, we all need that, because if you look at Pattaya, if you look at Thailand, a lot of the cases come from foreign offenders. So, you asked me before about that, and I think people need to know, why are you so involved in trafficking? Why do you need to help people on the ground in Thailand? And I think the answer of that question is because a lot of this trafficking is caused by us collectively. So if we represent Western men and women, if we represent that society, that culture, there's a lot of foreign sex offenders here who are from Australia and Europe and obviously America and Canada. I'm Canadian, so I can say that. So we need to be responsible. If we don't come in and help these children, who can? And if we don't come in and set something up to protect them, when the damage is done a lot by what we have done here locally, by foreign sex tourism, by offenders who come in to exploit children, we're all responsible. Because when a child is at risk, when a child has been exploited and damaged, you can't turn away and say, oh, it's none of my business, it has nothing to do with me, when it's in fact our neighbors and our friends and people that we know or relatives who are on the ground here and causing a lot of trafficking problems. So I think it's important for us to know that it is our responsibility, because the damage is very, very largely caused by foreigners.
Right. And I think that's a common misconception across the board. The whole, I get asked a lot when I talk about trafficking, is it happening here? And it's easy for people to say, that's an international problem and that's happening in Thailand. But I think that, I know for a fact that the majority of Americans don't realize that Pattaya is actually a destination for travelers. It's almost become, a tourist thing, right? That the Westerners go there to have sex with children. And so that was one of that was a shock to me when I first began looking into this cause. That was really eye-opening. And so, if our people are the consumers, then we're part of the problem, and we absolutely need to be taking up that fight. What is I know you and I have spoke about this before. What's the average age of children that you see and that you help?
So the majority of our cases are between, 0. The youngest case we had over the past couple of years has been 18 months. And, the majority of our cases is actually, a lot of people think, oh, it's, young girls, or majority of our cases are actually children between the ages of 0 to 13. The second largest number is 13 to 18. And then we go into older cases. So I think it's important to know that trafficking doesn't look the same everywhere. It really depends which state you're in the U.S., but it depends on which country or part of the country you're looking at. So trafficking up north in Thailand might look like teenage girls exploited by, army or by local consumers. But in Pattaya, it's, if you look at child exploitation, child trafficking, and child pornography, actually the victims are quite young. So that's very important for people to know. It doesn't always look like the young girl that you imagine in your mind. Also, very important thing to say is that 1/3 of our survivors are actually boys. And I know we talk about it often, but, we don't talk about it often enough. The last year, we've had so many boy cases, and it's because online exploitation is taking off and online trafficking is becoming more and more dominant. And so, in the past, the foreign sex offender, let's say in Canada, because I'm Canadian, let's say in Canada, he's sitting back home, he maybe have to have some magazines and hide them under the mattress. But fast forward to nowadays, so this 20 years ago, now he can just log in online, and within 20 minutes, he has access to webcams, to child pornography, to everything, because we haven't figured out how to stop it. And children are being exploited quite often. And, it's very important. And then they come in here. We have a lot of cases where they meet the moms or the stepmoms of the children online, and then the offender will come in here. We had an Australian case like that last year. And then he'll come in here and either rape the child or abuse the child or get more violent with the child. And this is a very common thing. And we can't, again, no longer say, oh, it's their problem, because it is not. We are online, and a lot of these kids are being exploited in villages in Thailand while the men are being all over the world.
Right. And so I think it's important that everyone understands why we're walking, why we're raising awareness, why we're fundraising. But I know you and I have talked about how you have the joy and the privilege of seeing the victims who eventually become survivors, come through the full restoration process. Do you have any stories that you would like to share? Maybe any of your favorite stories of survivors that have just been really restored through the A21 program?
Oh, I have so many stories, but I'll tell you 2 or 3 stories that are not unusual, but maybe kind of bring different light to trafficking. And one of them is a little girl that we have tried to help for about a year and a half. And basically she was, I think you can all Google it. If you Google like hula hoop girl in Pattaya, you're going to get some pictures of her. I can't show you pictures because that's against our policies, but this young girl, she was about 3 years old when she started, and she was drugged and left on the street to perform in really sexy outfits. So they'll put like a bathing suit kind of thing, or, and drug her and leave her there for about, again, 6 hours a night to perform and get money. So you have a 3-year-old who grew up on that street until she was, I think, 5. And we have been trying to get her off the street. And again, Pattaya unfortunately attracts a lot of good people, but as well a lot of bad people. So she was kind of used as bait for people who want to have sex with children. And we found one of her pictures on a pedophile website saying, nightlife with sexy young girl. Again, at that time she was about 4 or 5. This is a very young child who was left there. And so because obviously at 4 years of age, if you have kids, a child cannot stay in the same place for more than an hour. So they'll put in these uppers in her drink and make her go again. So she couldn't focus. We tried to talk to her. We tried to get her eyes to focus. She could not focus. And for the longest time, we tried everything. And then when A21 opened up the Child Advocacy Center, a new commander came in town, and he was really dedicated and focused on cleaning up Pattaya and basically protecting these children. And we were able to get her off the street, and she was in a shelter, and then we moved her with an amazing family. We paid for her schooling. We paid for everything. But, A21, when you start, it's not even about the rescue, because the rescue, that part that people like, the part when you come in and break down the door and, with the police does that and they do it well. It's the second part. It's the gap that provides services to children and makes sure that their lives are fulfilled. So this little girl who was drugged and left, and we found out paying the whole family. So she was paying the rent, she was paying the water at 4 years of age. And she's paid for offenders, So she went from that, from dancing every night, into she came to the Child Advocacy Center, and we wiped off the makeup. And under that makeup, it was a child. And she had full heavy makeup, and it was 4 a.m., and it was really funny because a lot of our cases come in at 4 or 5 a.m. and our social workers are tired, but, the police are tired and they're there. But these kids, they have energy because that's when they work. So they wanted to play at 4, 5, 6 a.m. and then they crashed. And so this little girl turned from I don't know, she was so sexualized. I can't even tell you the moves, everything that she was taught, the makeup, the moves, the drugs at 4 years old. And then when she got rescued, when we rescued her later on, basically she went from, a performer, a little girl who was used in sex trafficking to somebody who was a child, to a little girl. And it was interesting because she really wanted to do dancing and gymnastics. And I love this, that God used, something that was meant for bad, and God turned it, and it was a gift. She always had this gift of dancing. It was a gift that was given to her by the Lord. And the enemy utilized it for something bad. And when we rescued her, and when she went to a new home, she had kittens, and she really wanted to do gymnastics. And so we are also supporting that. And I think it's really important to look at the whole picture, because for a lot of these children, a lot of them are exploited, but they still, it matters who's walking with them, and it matters if you're fulfilling their destiny. So every case is different. We do different things, from buying chickens for the family so they don't sell the child, to providing gymnastic lessons with education and making sure, we talk to the teachers, we talk to the director, to the new family, to the school, to everybody, to ensure that she's safe. And I think that's part, again, there's a lot of moving pieces, as you said, Brandy, but it's at the end of the day, I think this is one of those cases where, you can look back and say, okay, at least, she's safe, and she's been safe for 2 years now, and she's doing really well.
I love that about A21. I love that it is a fully restorative program. I love that you can support the fact, that, and recognize the fact that God gave her gifts that she loves, and it can be used for good to bring glory to Him, instead of as a tool of the enemy. And I know that story, and I love that story, and I'm so glad that you shared that story. And I love I like the fact that you spoke to the fact that a third of your survivors are boys. And I think that if you would just briefly, because it's not just sex trafficking that A21 deals with, it's exploitation of humans and selling bodies as commodities. So could you just cover the different areas of trafficking that A21 serves?
Okay, so in Thailand, specifically, we focus on, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and we're quite focused on trafficking for begging, because trafficking for begging is quite predominant here in Asia. And it's something that most people overlook. And it's one of these areas of trafficking that, in my opinion, is probably the worst area of exploitation, because the children that are used for begging are quite young. So all the babies we've had, we had to help. Our babies used, again, as 3 months old to 18 months old, are children who are used for begging, because they don't move. And so the worst cases, I'll share a case with you, but the worst cases that I've seen over the 10 years that I've worked in trafficking have been always the begging cases. And I think because these children are so young and they're so vulnerable. And when you look at them, they're exploited for much more than just begging. They're exploited sexually. There's no parents there. They're, you can do anything you want with these kids. And at the end of the day, they come out. I'll share a case with you, actually, so you can see what trafficking for begging looks like. But we found this little boy. He was about 5 years of age in a hospital at the border between Thailand and Cambodia. And he was laying on the lap of a lady. And she said, well, I want to get rid of him. And I said, well, why? He's your son. And she said, no, I bought him. I bought him in Malaysia. So this lady told us, her story. And she went to Malaysia to beg. And she saved enough money to buy a child to beg with. So I guess her boyfriend was in a begging gang in Malaysia. She's Cambodian. And they had children come in this, basically, I can describe it as a halfway house. So this baby in particular, if the baby was, nice and plump and white skinned, they can sell the baby for a lot more money to Malaysians who want children to adopt. But this baby in particular was darker and smaller. And I guess the guy who was operating the halfway house basically beat up the baby quite bad. So the baby was crying a lot and he didn't want the neighbors to hear. So he locked the baby in the fridge or hid the baby. And this baby couldn't make a sound, and his rib cage the guy had squeezed his rib cage when the baby was crying. And the baby, that's an absolutely horrific story. So his rib cage has indentation in it. So anyway, so she told us this story because she used to stay in this house. They used to sleep there, and during the day they used to beg. So she bought this little boy who's, I think 1 at a time. So he was 5 when we found him. So she bought this little boy for $600 because he was cheaper. And she said, well, I love him so much. So she begged with him for 4 years on the streets of Malaysia. And she said to me, with all her belief, I really loved him. I never put his head down on the pavement. His head would always stay on my lap. What she didn't, of course, say was the fact that she drugged him for 4 years. Because as you can imagine, children, who are older than a year and a half, they want to start walking, they want to start running. And a part of the begging rings, and this is a very common thing, we see it all the time, these children are deformed because they keep them in the same spot for 8 hours. So if any of you guys have been to Asia or places where you find begging children, sometimes in Europe as well, you see these kids, they're asleep, and they're asleep for 8 hours a day, which is definitely not normal. Or if you have a 3-year-old or 2-year-old they can't run around. So this particular boy lay down on her lap, drugged with sleeping pills for about 4 years. And also when they give them sleeping pills, or here in Thailand, they give cough syrup. So when they drug them with that, the kids don't have to eat as often. So they save the money. So when we found this little boy, he was dying of, he was completely malnourished, and he was basically dying because he couldn't retain any food. So we had to go buy special milk formula and really take care of him well. But the reality of trafficking is that, people expect, the survivors, they just blossom. But most, when we took him to the hospital, and the doctor said, why do you even bother? We were back in Cambodia. The doctor basically said, why do you even bother? And it was me and a friend who's American. And, she demanded that she sees the doctor and does a proper x-ray screening. And the doctor said, well, he's not ever going to be able to walk or talk. Why are you bothering with this child? And, we found out his background. This little boy his mom was working in a brothel. So he's basically second generation trafficking victim. So she was working in a closed brothel. She was a Vietnamese Cambodian, which means she was a minority in her country. And whoever bought him from the brothel basically used the mom as well. So mom was living in this closed brothel, which means she couldn't leave the brothel. And this little boy was either aborted or he was bought off because she had to work. And you're looking at this, and yeah, I understand why, the doctor said that, because he comes from a war and a war-torn place. But it's just the value of human life and the importance that we place on people who are minorities, who are struggling. And a little boy who we were told would never walk and would never speak. And he couldn't say anything else. He made this sound. So this one sound that he would make because he couldn't speak. So we placed him in this incredible family who loved the Lord and raised him. And they didn't know what, they were doing their part of a church and said, okay, we want to start a small home for children, foster care. And they took this little boy in, and he just blossomed. We were doing speech therapy. We were doing all kinds of therapy with him, physical therapy, because he couldn't walk. And so a year later, I go and we have to visit our cases quite often. So in A21, we have a very good structure in terms of reporting and accountability. And so we visit this little boy, and I see this little boy who couldn't walk, riding a bicycle. Okay, slowly. He still can't walk straight, but he was walking, okay? And then you see this little boy who couldn't, speak. He was singing this worship song. And the worship song, maybe he was, again, he couldn't sing it properly, but he was singing. And when you look at the value, that's the value. Some cases, yes, maybe they'll never walk. Maybe they'll never speak. But this is the value of a little boy, and he's happy. And at the end of the day, if we can provide everything he needs to be happy, he's going to special school now. And we found out that there's only one school that takes care of children with disabilities in Phnom Penh. So they didn't have enough funds for a teacher. So we hired a teacher. The salary for a teacher is very low in Cambodia, but we hired a teacher. And you just have to make a way where there's no way. And that's the best I can describe assisting survivors. You have to make a way, because if you don't, no one will. And if you don't care, then who will? So it is you, it is this time, and it is survivors like that little boy that make it okay for us to keep going.
I love that story, and I love your passion and your heart behind it. And I am a firm believer, and I always coach from a place of yes. And don't tell me how it can't be done. Find a way to do it. And that's one of my favorite things about you and A21 and Christine Kane. And man, you guys, you don't take no for an answer, and you don't leave people behind. And that's impressive. That's impressive, because there's a lot of people that get overwhelmed with the gravity of it all. How do you personally, like, shifting gears a bit? It's heavy work. And I've watched you share from your heart several times, and I know how much you feel and how connected you are with these people, and they're not just a number to you. So how do you keep your mind straight? How do you keep yourself, from being overwhelmed, and how do you just stay focused and positive?
Oh, I love that question, because it's always hard to answer that. I've been on the ground in Thailand for 10 years now. And in the beginning, I said, I'll be fine. I didn't cry. And there were my first case actually passed away. And I think, when I just got here, I didn't speak the language well. And my first little girl, she passed away. And I think ever since that moment, you let that drive you. And I think if the Lord is giving you grace to do something, that it's your thing to do. And I feel like He'll give you grace, but you also have to take care of yourself, because you have to give out of a place that, you have enough to give. And I found that later on that, it does get to you. And the most important thing that I can always say is that, when it gets to you, I started crying maybe 5 years in, 6 years in, I was starting to cry more often. And I went to somebody and I said, I don't know if this is normal. Before I wasn't that sensitive, but now I'm more emotional. And she told me that, she was a psychologist. She told me it is not normal not to cry. She's like, it is, you have to cry, because this is what God doesn't mean for you to be okay with that. You're not supposed to be okay with these kids and these situations, even old people that we help. And but the Lord gives you grace. You have a drive, and it's inside of you. And I read this, this article, and said your passion is, the calling, your life calling, your life purpose is where your passion meets your gifting, and it meets what you're able to give to the world, and what, you have talent in. And so I thought about it, and I think at the end of the day, we all have to keep going. And for people who are wondering, what can I do? I don't know anything. I have this story, which I love to share. So I met these missionaries who basically were in Africa, and the woman was, about 6 years old, and she just she knit. She did like crocheting and knitting she loved that. That was her passion. That was everything that she wanted to do. And her friend, she was in this Bible study, used to make fun of her for loving crocheting so much. So she would subscribe to these magazines, and she would sit there and crochet. And then, everyone told her, well, you can't use that for anything. So they go on this mission trip, and they get to this village in Africa, and it's all widows and women who are left behind the civil war. And so she met with these women, and she said, well, maybe I can, start something, show them how to crochet and knit, and see if somebody will be able to buy their products. So she went back, and this chain of stores decided that was the best idea ever. And that was about 10 years ago, by the way. So they decided this is amazing. So she went back, and now she has 3 factories in that village full of women who are crocheting for a purpose and selling the products. And they have enough food for their children, and their children are not sold in trafficking. And you have to look at that. You have to look at your passion. If you're not passionate about something, maybe it's not your thing, but you have to ask God, what can I do with what He's put in my hands? And no gift is too small. Even if you're the lady who's crocheting at home and wondering what good does that do to anybody, it can save a life. So you never discard the passion, because your passion is given to you from the Lord.
Oh, you are taking it to church today, Malina. That is the simple, that's the simple fact. I know that there's someone sitting at home right now thinking that, well, great that you're talking to the Thai country director, for A21, that's huge. I can't make an impact like she can. And I think that people just have to realize that it comes from a place of saying yes to God and allowing him to use you and using the gifts that you have. So I couldn't have said it any better. I'm like writing down quotes. I'm like, Malina said. Oh, but I thank you so much for joining us today. I know that I have a fire lit under me it's morning for me. It's evening for you. But this morning I have a fire in my step, and I love you. I love your heart. I love what you're doing for God's people, and I'm blessed to call you my friend.
Oh, thank you so much, Brandy. And for you guys, I just want you to know Brandy's passion and everything you do, Brandy. It is so encouraging to see people like you and everything that you've given to make Walk for Freedom happen, to get involved, and you don't stop. And I love that. I love your passion. I love who you are. And I'm so grateful for you as well.
Oh, thanks. I have one more question for you that I ask everyone. And I mean, I already have my answer, but I always ask everyone, if you could be a superhero, what would your superhero name be? And what would your superpower be? And while you're thinking about that, I'll tell you that I'm just going to say you're already a superhero, and your superhero name is just Malina.
I love that. That's so sweet. I've never thought about this. I'm not prepared to answer that question, but I just, I would love to heal and make people feel better. And I think that's, people take that for granted, but, we are supposed to help people. And that's part of who we are as a DNA and who God made us to be. And I really would love to spend my life helping others to heal and get better.
I think you're doing it well. I think you're living it out, sister, and I'm proud of you, and I'm thankful for you, and I hope you have a great evening. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Brandy. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Oh man, it is always a joy and privilege to get to speak with Malina. She's such a beautiful soul and doing big, big things for the kingdom. If you have questions about how to get involved with A21, you can go to a21.org. That's the letter A, the number 2, the number 1.org. You can click on campaigns and find Walk for Freedom. Click register, and you're going to be able to search for a walk in your city, no matter what country you're in, on this Saturday in the U.S. side, October 20th, but October 20th worldwide. If you would like more information on human trafficking or to speak with Malina directly, you can email her at malinaenlund@gmail.com. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard today and you would like to hear more of it, go over to iTunes, subscribe to us, write a review, share it on all forms of social media, give us a like on Instagram, and help us just continue to bring this show to you. I can't wait to talk with you next time. I have a special guest coming this Thursday, and she's another A21 friend of mine, so I'll see you then.